Hi, this is the Brookline Rotary, and we are meeting on May 14th. And I'm going to turn over the microphone to Susan Rack in order for her to introduce our speaker. Hi, Susan.
Well, this really is an honor. We have with us today, and Melinda, I'm going to butcher your last name.
Don't worry about it.
Happens.
Maryniuk?
How about Maryniuk? It's fine.
Maryniuk.
Yeah, Maryniuk works. Yeah.
Maryniuk. Despite my inability to pronounce her name, Melinda's reputation has preceded her. Melinda is a registered dietitian nutritionist. She has spent the better part of her 40-plus year career dealing with, or focusing, I should say, on diabetes and diabetic diets. She completed her internship at Tufts New England Medical Center. She has received numerous awards, is the author of over 100 publications, and it is really our honor and privilege to have her with us today. She's going to help us deal with nutrition and dietetics in this time of Corona. And at any time, general information.
That's
so
right.
Melinda, it's all yours.
Thank you, Susan. It is nice to see a number of familiar faces. So Laura Walters, a good friend for many years, we used to live around the corner from each other in Brookline, reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and said that you were all interested in nutrition and you had some questions. So I will speak for a little bit. I have just a couple of remarks, but I would really love to turn this into a dialogue as well and have you ask me what's on your mind. I may or may not know the answer, but we can share and talk together. So anyway, it is nice to see you. I was a Brookline resident between, I'm going to say 1993 and 2010, so almost 20 years. And then we moved way far away. Actually, I can almost see Brookline from my house. I now live in Jamaica Plain. So we did kind of like the reverse thing. We were in a sort of tiny cramped condo that was perfect for being across the street from the Lawrence School where our kids went, and I could walk to work at Joslin Diabetes Center. But I had this itch to actually have a little house with a little yard. So we moved into the city for that. It's kind of opposite, but anyway, I'm still very close, right by Jamaica Pond. So I guess the question that might be on some of your minds that I thought I would address first is, what can I do, if anything, to keep my body as strong as possible, to reduce the risk of inflammation and what is inflammation, to stay as strong and healthy as possible, whether it's to reduce risks of COVID or for fighting that, and just in general to stay as strong and healthy as we can. And we're seeing these links between COVID and inflammation, and inflammation refers to the body's process of fighting against things that harm it, such as toxins, infections, injuries. And so we hear a lot about this kind of buzzword, and there are, in fact, some foods that are linked with helping to fight inflammation and to keep us really strong. And honestly, there's no magic to it. I bet you if I gave you a test and had you check off all of the foods that are the healthiest and most linked with reducing inflammation and keeping you strong, you would probably get 100%. So let's think about them. And I would, if it was easy, I'd do a little interaction. So you're probably thinking, well, probably vegetables and fruits. Well, absolutely. And the more colorful they are, the more nutrients they have in them and the more antioxidants they have in them. So don't bother with the iceberg lettuce because it's pretty white, but thinking of the dark leafy greens, your spinach, your kale, your broccoli. And that doesn't mean you can't have cauliflower. That's one of those outliers that just happens to be white. But in general, the highly colored vegetables and fruits are ideal. Particularly linked with inflammation in terms of some of the research does include broccoli, tomatoes, blueberries, but really all of them are great. And I think in general, whether it's this time or you know, the COVID era or otherwise, none of us eat, or very few of us eat as many vegetables as ideally we should. I often talk about with people with diabetes, and this really applies to everybody, as you think about your plate, a typical dinner plate, you want to see half of it filled with non-starchy vegetables. And so that's your broccoli and your kale and your salad and your tomatoes and your carrots and your beets. Your starchy vegetables, which are your potatoes, corn, peas, that's considered, I mean, it's still a vegetable and it does have some nutrients, but it's got so much carbohydrate, especially for people with diabetes, they're trying to limit that a little bit. So when I talk about half your plate of vegetables, I'm not meaning half your plate of potatoes and corn, but the other non-starchy vegetables. So back to the foods that help reduce your risk for inflammation. So fruits and vegetables are big, and you've probably checked that on, you're like, oh, I know that. And then you're thinking, well, what else? So whole grains, so whole wheat, and then some of the many kind of new grains that have become so popular, whether it's quinoa, amaranth, buckwheat, bulgur, you name it. All of those whole grains are linked with a number of good health benefits, including reducing your risk for getting diabetes or pre-diabetes. In terms of what other foods, fatty fish, salmon, we see benefits with the omega fatty acids in that. Other lean meats, most people eat far more meats and fish and protein than we actually really need. 4 to 8 ounces in a day, about the size that would fill a quarter of your plate is really adequate. In fact, more than we need. We often kind of reverse think, and I'm sure you've heard this, that many people start with thinking like, well, my meat should cover about half my plate. That's the main dish. And you have a little side dish of a vegetable or a starch, but really the meat or fish or poultry could be more like a quarter of your plate. The other foods that you should probably be thinking about that are those in that healthy list, and you're right, if you're thinking about beans, all kinds of beans, dried beans, pinto beans, chickpeas, garbanzo beans, all of them, kidney beans, white beans, cannellini beans, really healthy, all kinds of nuts, pretty much everything that's not a processed food is really good and healthy for reducing risk of inflammation. So those are the things to be eating a lot of. The other thing that I wanted to say is, and this can be hard during this period, is be as active as you can. And I think one of the things that a number of my similar age friends have found is that, wow, we're trying some exercises because we can do it in the privacy of our own home through Zoom to do things like, my one friend had never tried yoga because she was embarrassed and didn't want to go to a group class and have everybody see her. But now she's doing it because nobody could watch her. So she feels safe. I tried a Zumba class because I always wanted to do that, but also felt like awkward and embarrassed. So as hard as it is to kind of keep up what your usual pre-COVID routine is, doing the exercises, particularly strength-based and resistance, and whether it's lifting soup cans or pulling stretch bands, really keeping the muscles strong is extremely important. And then the third thing I wanted to say is the importance of continuing to weigh yourself on a fairly regular basis. Now, I'm hearing a lot of people say, oh my goodness, you know, being at home, I think I'm gaining so much weight. Usually you have your own ways without even getting on a scale of knowing if your belt feels tighter, if your clothes are feeling a little snug. Actually, what I'm finding, and I work with some social media communities of people who have type 2 diabetes, is that their weight is staying remarkably stable. And one of the reasons that I think that this is true, even though we may feel like we're eating more, is most of us, raise your hand if you generally eat a restaurant meal once every other week or like twice a month. Okay, I see a number of hands. Some of you maybe less, some of you maybe more. A typical restaurant meal is going to give you about 1,500 calories. Now, I know many of you might be thinking like, oh no, I would never eat that much. You don't realize how much fat and oil and sugar and calories get packed into something in a restaurant. So the mere fact that we are generally not eating out as much and eating at home more, we're probably eating healthier than you think. So I think that's one of the good side effects. I did prepare a little handout that might have been sent to you. It was something that I wrote for the community I work with of people with type 2 diabetes, adults with type 2 diabetes, and they were just looking for some basic tips for meal planning to help them in thinking about food. And some of the things that I put on that list are the importance of building your meals, writing out the meals that you plan to eat for the week, really making your shopping list. I don't know how many of you are like me. I tend to sort of not plan a meal a week or two at a time. And now I'm doing that because I'm really limiting a number of times I go to the grocery store. And so being really pretty careful about what we're having Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and building my menus, if you will, from what I already have. And so I make sure that I'm using that can of kidney beans that's in the cupboard, or that I find what's at the bottom of my freezer and pull it out and thaw it and use it. People tend to waste an incredible amount of food. It's really sad that we are not always planning and using what we have. We're planning and eating what we feel like having and what we think might taste good tonight. So I think this period of lockdown, if you will, is making us all more intentional and thoughtful of trying to be a little bit more frugal and less wasteful, I think, related to food. I think because also most of us, I would guess, are in the position of we are not standing on food pantry lines, but we are hearing about people that are. And, you know, we're trying to be as careful as we can and not as wasteful. And so I think one of the things that's really important is to just make sure we plan our menus around what we have. And also be ready to have a plan B, because when you get to the store and you were thinking of having a particular ingredient and it's not there, you've got to think of, all right, I can quickly change. There's no chicken breasts, I'll use chicken thighs. Or there's no one certain kind of fish, but they have another kind of fish. So you also aren't spending, or I'm not spending a lot of time, and I'm sure you're not either, just like roaming the aisles. You're very intentional. You're going down, grabbing what you need, and moving forward. So I put a couple of tips on here. I know that a number of the people that I was working with were saying, and I see this too in Brookline, frozen vegetables, really hard to find. And you're going maybe once a week to the store, or even less. You buy fresh vegetables, by the end of the week, they're not looking so good. And we are not that used to freezing our own fresh vegetables. And it's pretty easy. I wrote out the process of how to just blanch them, buy a lot of broccoli or beets or whatever it is that you enjoy, and freeze them in little Ziploc freezer bags so that you have them and have them ready. Also, a process for just freezing chopped onions and peppers. It seems like most things I make have to start with chopped onions and peppers, and I am not running to the store and picking up those things. So how do you freeze them in a single layer first, flash freeze, and then put them in the bag so they're not all stuck together? I think I'll stop there for a little bit. I'd love you to turn on your microphones and just either make any comments or ask me specific questions that you're wondering about, and just have a general conversation or ask the dietitian. So
Melinda, let me start by saying that the handout will be made available underneath this YouTube video, and also it's on the Brookline Rotary website. So if you look for Brookline Rotary in the download files, you'll find your nutrition handout.
Okay, I'll point out that one of the things I spoke about is this may be the time that for you to think about having more meatless meals. If you aren't a vegetarian, and I'm not saying you need to be, I'm not. I think it's a fine way of eating if you enjoy it, but I think that we can probably all increase the number of meals that we have that are plant-based. And especially as we're concerned about the shutting down of more meat factories and the prices of these products going up, this is a great time to try more dishes that are plant-based. And so in the handout, I included several recipes for plant-based meals. George, I saw your hand.
Yeah. Among the foods that you specifically mentioned as being very good for us are some of them, like beans, the musical fruit, are known by people of all ages, but there are others too that for the rest of us, as we have increased in years and wisdom, but apparently not in other enzymes or whatever, the beans, the broccoli, any cruciflora thing. Is there a way or a product? I mean, you can pitch a product that will be a little more gentle and encourage us or incline us to eat yet more beans, broccoli, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, right. Yeah, some people do have a hard time with the extra fiber, if you will, and the effects of the beans. So, you know, two things. It's just basically increase it more gradually. If you've never had a lot of these things, don't go and have, you know, a cup a day, but increasing gradually. And secondly, if it really is bothersome, trying a product like Beano, B-E-A-N-O. And many people report that that decreases the gassy side effects.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Sharon.
Your microphone is off.
Oh, sorry, the microphone.
All right, I'm going to unmute you, so don't fumble for it. Go ahead.
You could probably unmute everybody. That way we'll just do a hand raise. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
Sharon, wait a minute. Don't touch anything. I'm going to unmute you. No, I can't. You're going to have to do it.
while she's figuring that out, does anybody else have a question? Yeah, Susan.
Okay, so I am in the very fortunate position of having a lovely neighbor who is shopping for me. I have not been to the supermarket for 9 weeks now. But I know he's a little tentative about buying fresh vegetables and fruits for me because is he picking out the right thing? Are they good? Are they bad? So I've been telling him, just get me vegetables or fruits, you know. Is there canned versus frozen better? Frozen versus canned better? What would you suggest?
Yeah, great. So yeah, it gets to the point where a little of like what's available. So in terms of canned, frozen, fresh, really all good. There are a couple caveats. So fresh and frozen are pretty much the same. In fact, many would say frozen are even a little bit better in terms of the nutrients, depending on how long the fresh have been sitting out. Because one thing people don't think about with the frozen, they tend to be picked and then frozen right away. So a lot of times, I know when I grew up, you felt like, oh, frozen is like worst, but actually it can be great. So in terms of canned, many of us have to watch the amount of salt in our diet, and the canned vegetables tend to have salt. So we just suggest a quick rinse if that's what you're getting. I mean, they're certainly easy and convenient, and they can be, you know, not very costly, but because of the sodium, I would rinse it. The other thing to do with the fresh, just to watch, is that many of the new blends and varieties have like special sauces added to them, and those sauces could be adding a lot of sodium or fat. So you just kind of want to watch what's being grabbed. So I see
Sharon's ready. She's ready.
You didn't know it.
Yeah.
No, Sharon. Okay, sorry guys. She just called me. She just said Sharon. Didn't you, Joy?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So we're not fighting. This is how we act. So Melinda, I'm on the FODMAP diet, which is horrendous. So I'd very much want to have beans and all those things. It's kind of a follow-up on George's as well. But if I go vegetarian, which I have no problem, what will I have for protein?
So which protein sources can you have? Which are best for you?
I mean, I can have, what I can have is fish and chicken and meat and, but when it comes to beans, it doesn't work.
Yep.
All the vegetarian.
And what about tofu? What about nuts? What about corn and rice?
Corn and rice are a protein?
Well, they have adequate amounts. So, if you had corn and rice together, it's pretty good. Putting a little cheese on top of it. I've been doing a number of like what I call Mexican casseroles of mixing. I would add black beans to it. You might not. So you might just also have a little bit less meat than you did before. But when you think about the protein sources, certainly this your dairy, your yogurt, your cheese, your nuts, your nut butters, in addition to canned the beans. So yeah.
Yeah, hi, this is the spouse of Sharon. 2 questions. First of all, I have type 2 diabetes that's under control. And the question is is cheese good or not good? And should low-fat cheese or sharp cheese or?
Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that question. So it's a really interesting area of research. In fact, the dean, actually he's the head of the whole Tufts Nutrition School, the Friedman School. His name is Dariush Mazafarian, and he used to be, he is a cardiologist. He was for 10 years at Harvard at the Brigham, and then he went over to Tufts to run the nutrition school a number of years ago. And I give you that background just to show you his credibility. And his area, one of his areas of research has been in dairy and looking at the surprising benefits that whole milk dairy seems to have, whether it's whole milk yogurt, whole milk cheese, and finding that there seems to be links with people who don't have diabetes, who have more whole milk dairy in their diet, seem to get it less. Now, once you have diabetes, you're not good at, if you have more dairy, you're not going to, get rid of it. But interestingly, we've been for so long been telling people low fat, low fat, low fat for everything, right? And I think that we've been giving the wrong message, especially around foods like dairy. It seems like that the fat in whole milk yogurt, whole cheeses does not seem to have the same negative effects on raising blood cholesterol that we were thinking about. We're worried about the amount of saturated fat in dairy foods. Now, certainly a whole milk cheese is going to be higher in calorie than a low-fat cheese, but not by a lot. When you look at the label, it's what? Maybe 80 calories versus 100 calories for an ounce. Not a big difference, honestly. And so the example that I often give to people who are wondering about, do I like yogurt? Should I only have non-fat yogurt? And I say, well, you can have it if you enjoy it, but the whole milk yogurt will usually, because of that fat, keep you feeling full longer. And so if you're having a yogurt for lunch and it's a whole milk yogurt, you'll feel full till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, interestingly, you've heard about the benefits of the Mediterranean diet, right? High in cheese and yogurt. You can be sure that the classic Mediterranean, folks in Italy and Greece and everywhere are not eating non-fat yogurt, non-fat cheese. So moderate amounts of natural healthy foods is probably really good.
Melinda, I'm under the endocrinologist that I'm with is Jody Duche.
Oh, yeah.
So if I wanted to have a telehealth call with you, how would I do that?
So I don't see patients, but I'm happy to just talk to you. You can give me a call and we can talk about your diet if you like. So.
Okay. Can you text me that number or?
We can get it from Laura.
You can get my email.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Sure.
I'd like to ask a question, Melinda. I'd like to ask you about the grains and the cereals, because I think that at some point that may be the majority of what we have to eat. Can you kind of give us a breakdown of which ones are healthier in those things?
Yeah, sure. Probably the worst grains. In fact, maybe I'll turn it back to all of you. When you think about the grains, the meal that we tend to have the most grains tends to be breakfast. And let's just list off some of the classic breakfast grains that are least healthy. What would they be? Anybody want to just throw out some of those?
Sugar.
Pardon? Sugar.
Oh, right, sorry.
What else?
English muffin,
White English
bagel,
muffins, white
bagels.
bagels, white waffles, white pancakes,
Mhm.
all of the classic cereals that I grew up with, cornflakes, Rice Krispies, sort of the Cheerios, not very whole grain, hearty cereals.
Oh,
And-
Cheerios, despite their advertising, are not all that great? Okay.
Yeah, well, they've got a little bit of fiber, right? They do. I think that the food advertisers do a fair bit to sort of stretch that whole grain message. So I think in general, breakfast cereals, processed breakfast cereals are pretty processed. And the more you've taken a food from its most natural state and turned it into something that doesn't look at all like the original form, the least good it is for you. Now, that's not to say don't eat it, but look for a breakfast cereal if you're going through the meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that has a higher amount of fiber in it. It's going to be better, and the least amount of added sugars, as Sharon was saying. And if you are having English muffins, choose a whole wheat English muffin, a whole grain English muffin, or whatever. And there are a variety of like frozen waffles that are better for you, that are whole grain. I think Kashi makes them. And then if you go to like lunch and think about breads and whole grains, I look for two things: the size of the bread, the size of the slice, and then what's in it in terms of added fiber and nuts and seeds and kind of grainy things to add a little extra value to it. But some of the breads, the slices are so thick and there's so much carbohydrate in it that people, especially who might be trying to limit the amount of carbs in their diet, have to watch out for that. So I kind of favor like a bread called Dave's Killer Bread that offers it in thin slice. So it's a little less in calorie, a little less in carbohydrate, but it still has all of the kind of grains and seeds and whole grains that are in it. And then for supper, if you're thinking about what kind of grains, whole grains for a side dish, potatoes are really not all that healthy in terms of adding a lot of extra nutrients. They have some potassium and they have some fiber if you eat the skin, but they are particularly, they can particularly spike people's blood sugar who have diabetes. So we kind of limit the amount of potatoes that people are eating. But the other grains I was mentioning, farro, bulgur, quinoa, trying a variety of them and seeing, what resonates with you, what you like. Brown rice, they can be pretty high in calories. So visually, if you're used to having like, a big mound, like a cup or so, especially if you have diabetes, you probably can't have quite that much. It might spike your blood sugar. If blood sugar is not an issue or a problem for you, have what you like, but have the whole grain, like the brown rice variety, instead of the refined. So you're hearing a theme here: the more whole, the better; the more refined and processed, the least good.
Thank you.
All right.
Other questions?
Since they are white and don't have the husks, I assume that grits are not really a health food.
Yeah. Tasty
they're
now
good.
and then. I like to think of some of these things as, we talk about the 80-20 rule. Have you ever heard about that for food? So 80% of the time you're eating whole, unprocessed, really healthy things. But 20% of the time we're having those other foods that we want to make sure can fit in our diet. So
How about eggs? I don't think we've mentioned eggs, or
Have them. And it used to be, you probably all heard at one point from your doctors, no more than 3 a week, right? Did anybody ever hear that? Wanted to limit the amount of cholesterol. That recommendation has been changed. They really don't see the link between the cholesterol and eggs spiking your own blood cholesterol. So I'm not saying you should have 2 eggs a day every day, but there's no longer the general recommended limit for 3 egg yolks a week. So
They're a good source of protein too, right?
Exactly, and it's cheap. So one of the recipes I included in the handout is for shakshuka, which is just a really simple tomato-based dish with eggs in it that, it's kind of a good pantry meal. Yeah.
Where is polenta on this?
So polenta, I would say, would be sort of in the middle, depending on how processed that corn is. I don't think there's too much fiber in it. I'm honestly not sure with it. Laura, it looks like you're nodding your head. Are you familiar with the kind of nutrient breakdown on that? You're on mute though. Yeah.
I don't think it's great either. I think it's right in the middle.
Yeah.
It's something they eat a lot in the part of Italy my grandparents were from in the north, but it's corn, of course. So
Yeah.
It's polenta is Italian for grits.
Yeah. There are some benefits to the steel cut oats on one end of the scale. Kind of like the worst is the instant oat packets that have the brown sugar already added to it. So ideally steel cut oats can really be annoying because they take so long to make. And I tend to just use either the old-fashioned oats, or I pre-cook a bunch of steel cut oats and then heat them up in the morning. The other thing that I do, which is, I think, if you've never made overnight oats, taking a little jar and putting like 1/3 of a cup of your old-fashioned oats, and then some yogurt or some milk, and then some fruit, some berries, or cut up peaches or whatever. I put sometimes some chia seeds or other seeds in there, and make sure there's plenty of liquid in it, and then put the lid on it and keep it in your fridge overnight. And in the morning, it's delicious. You don't heat it. It's almost like a muesli. It's like a very different dish. I didn't think I would like it because I thought it just sounded too weird, but just Google overnight oats and you'll be amazed at the combinations of oats and fruit and yogurt, milk, whatever you like to sort of give it some moisture. It's great. So just
that sounds wonderful. We have a question in the chat too. Are vitamin supplements a good alternative if I don't have a good source of fruits and vegetables?
Oh, good question.
So yeah, that's a good question. Certainly the priority is to try to get it through your diet, but if you can't for whatever reason, getting a just general multivitamin is fine. I would not go buy individual vitamins like, get a C and a B and a magnesium and a whatever. I tend to just say get a multivitamin that looks like, when you look at the nutrients on the side, that is pretty much ramped up for most of the key nutrients. And then many people are recommended to also take a calcium and vitamin D in addition to that. Now you're not going to get that from fruit, but just because we're all of similar ages, we often don't get enough of the calcium and vitamin D. So that's usually recommended as well.
I would be happy to recommend, in terms of the calcium and vitamin D, Dove, I believe it's called. Anyway, they are chocolates and they are tasty.
Oh, with the supplemental calcium.
Yes, they are tasty. You can get them at Whole Foods, probably other places, and of course Amazon, who sells you anything except fireworks. And, but they're very tasty. They're dark chocolate. They have whatever the milligrams are of the recommended supplemental dosage of both vitamin D and calcium.
Cool.
And
as long as it doesn't become a snack that you think like, well, that was good, I'll have another one. So.
Well, can you get too much calcium?
Well, you can get too much.
Or too much chocolate, for that matter. Let me go get. They're right out here.
So Well, I'm looking at the time. I've got a few more minutes, but I actually have another webinar that I'm logging into at 1 o'clock. So if there's anything else, I'm happy to answer it. This has been fun.
Thank you so much, Melinda. This has been
Melinda, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.